In today's show, Clyde Drexler makes his beef with the franchise as clear as it's ever been. Plus, is it time for the Blazers to maybe lose? Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making this show your first listen, coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen. Tell your friends to do the same. As Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's program, talking about a couple things. First and foremost, Clyde Drexler has beef with the organization. If you are, say, older than the age of 10, you understand this because you've never seen Clyde Drexler in the building in closing in on 30 years. It's been a while. But for the first time, in an interview with Kerry Eggers, veteran reporter Kerry Eggers here in Portland, Clyde Drexler made his beef as clear as he ever has. He stated it as plainly as he ever has in his many years away from the franchise, what exactly is keeping him out of the building and away from embracing Blazer fans in a way that's would make you feel like he was part of the program or part of the franchise in a meaningful way, because he probably is the best Blazer ever. We'll talk about that. For my money, he is the best Blazer ever. In any case, we'll also talk about the Blazers' situation. 9 games to go, 3 outs from the 10th seed, with a big game looming against the suddenly reeling Kings, losers of 4 in a row. A very meaningful game on Thursday nights, and we'll talk about kind of all of the implications surrounding that. But let's start with Clyde. In a story posted on CarrieEggers.com, the blog for veteran writer Kerry Eggers, who's written for very, very many places, The Oregonian, the Portland Tribune, and now his own personal website over a long career that stretches 4+ decades in the Blazers and the Portland sports writing scene. I've been around for a very brief time compared to Kerry, and I've covered the Blazers in various capacities for about a decade. Kerry was a veteran scribe when I met him, working for the Oregonian, and remains a valuable member of what we so often in this culture, we have thrown away the value of institutional knowledge, but we need veteran scribes. We need folks like Kerry Eggers out there in the world, because when the Blazers hosted a 90s appreciation night against the Nuggets last Friday, and many members of that organization were present, including Buck Williams, including Terry Porter, including some family members of some of the deceased members of those 90s teams, including Rick Adelman, and Rick Adelman's son was there because Dave coaches as assistant coach for the Nuggets. A big chunk of the 90s heyday, the best run the Blazers have ever had, the most consistent success they've ever had, that 90s group, obviously rest in peace Kevin Duckworth and Uncle Cliffy and Jerome Kersey, whose families were all represented in some way, in some form or fashion. Clyde was absent. In a night you celebrate everybody, Clyde was absent. And he's a big, glaring absence. And leading up to this, I knew it was coming. Someone with the Blazers said, hey, by the way, in a couple weeks, we're going to do a 90s night. And I said, is Clyde going to be there? I said, of course not. Because Clyde doesn't come around. He's never come around. In my 10 years around the team, I have known several times, probably not a dozen, but more than 5, when the Blazers have actively reached out to Clyde to get him back in the building. Please come back. You don't even have to do anything. Just sit in your seat and wave. We'll put you on camera. No ceremony, no nothing. And Clyde has declined, or Clyde has ignored them, or to varying degrees. No interest in coming back. And when asked about it, he's always coy and weird. And in the past, he said there was a time right around when Damian Lillard was breaking Clyde's scoring record, that Clyde, he didn't make any public appearances around then. And he said, I reached out to the team privately, and they're really bad at reaching out to alumni. And then literally the next day, the Blazers hired Terry Porter as a team ambassador. And it's like, well, They're good at reaching out to some of these dudes. I will say, to echo Clyde's sentiments there, I have heard from multiple people, both on former players' side and within the organization, that, yeah, it's a struggle. It is the Blazers dropped the ball for probably several decades in terms of reaching out, particularly to those 90s teams, and kind of dropped the ball. And quite frankly, if you look up in the rafters, there is this awkward situation where so many members of that 1977 championship team are represented up in the rafters, and just not nearly enough players from the 90s team, the second great heyday of the Blazers, are represented. Like, as Clyde Drexler told Kerry Eggers in the story, like, Jerome Kersey's jersey should be retired. And he mentioned Buck Williams and Kevin Duckworth. I don't know if Duck is a guy who played at the level to get his jersey retired, but certainly you can make a very compelling case for Buck Williams, and certainly you can make a very compelling case for Jerome Kersey. And if you look at the other numbers up in the rafters, you don't even need to make a compelling case. You just put them up there. They deserve to be there. And from the 2000s era, nada, nothing. Sheed, nothing. Like, Sabonis, nothing. They're just not up there. The Blazers have done a poor job. Very much so, a poor job of connecting with the alumni. I think that is, if you have been around the team enough, you know that that's a problem dating back for several decades. Made just in the last year, the Blazers have hired someone to be a director of alumni and kind of revamp this, and it's become an important thing for them. But we're talking several decades of doing this poorly. And Clyde's got beef. But in the past, it would be this amorphous beef about, oh, he wanted to, but he didn't reach out. Oh, they didn't get me. But for the first time, Kerry Eggers got him on the record, and he basically told you exactly what the deal is. Respect to veteran scribes. Respect to veteran reporters who've been doing this a while, because that's the folks who can call up Clyde and say, yeah, I mean, yeah, you build those relationships. Certainly media relationships and media and player relationships were different many, many moons ago than they are now. But like shout out and respect to Kerry Eggers. And he told Kerry, the story starts with Clyde kind of doing the same song and dance, where he says, like, oh, I just never got my invite. They never invited me. I didn't know when it was. I'm at home with my wife, who's recovering from breast cancer, and she's doing well, but I just never got the invite. Maybe I would have made time. That's BS. Come on. Certainly, Clyde Drexler probably got several invitations. He knew exactly when it was. They told him several times, and he just ignored them like he has for several decades, 25 years or more, 30 years. But then Clyde gets to the truth. The reason that you don't see him around is because the dude hates Bert Cold. And thank you for just saying what it is, because I think people can respect petty beef. People can respect hatred of bosses. People can respect if someone who makes a bunch of money, who's above you, and you don't feel like they should have the right to make some decisions, you don't like them. And people can respect grudges. I'm a grudge holder. I respect grudges, and I respect just calling it what it is. And so finally, Kerry Eggers basically gets to the meat of it, and Clyde admits the deal. He doesn't like Bert Cold, and he's never going to come around as long as Bert Cold is involved in the organization. You might say, who's Bert Cold? I'm always surprised people don't know that name, but increasingly, some of my friends and many listeners don't know that name. Bert Cold is Paul Allen's college roommate, who has been around the Blazers from the moment Paul Allen bought the team, and is now one of, if not the most powerful voice in the organization. He's been part of the ownership group since Allen bought the team way back when, and in the 80s, and he remains a major part of Vulcan Entertainment and a major part of the ownership group. You'll see him at games, sitting next to Jody and Joe and Dwayne Hankins on the baseline. You'll see him when Jeremy Grant signed his big contract. You know who's the ownership representative there. When the Blazers held a board of governor meetings, not this last summer, but the prior summer, the representative of the Blazers at the board of governor meetings was Bert Cold. Like this is. I'm not going to call him like the capital O owner, but this is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful voice in the organization and representative of the ownership group. And Clyde hates him. That's as simple as it is. He has beef with Bert Cold. That's it. If Bert Cold wasn't around, he's been around since the beginning and he's still here now, Clyde might come back. Maybe he wouldn't, but that's the first step, right? That's the first step. And for the first time on the record and first time just plain out there in the open for all of us to know, Clyde Drexler explains why he's not around. Because he doesn't like Bert Cold. And if Bert's around, and Bert's going to be around because I don't think the Blazers ownership group is particularly motivated to sell the team, Drexler is not going to be involved with the organization. It is what it is. I will say this. There were times on this podcast when I believed that Damian Lillard had a clear path to being the best Blazer of all time, the greatest Blazer of all time. And my argument for that was that Dame was going to be a Blazer, and he was going to, he was going to rack up all of these awards and and all of these, be at the top of all the record books, right? And he was going to be the all-time leading scorer, and he's going to lead the team in assists and minutes and games played, and he was going to have, minor team success, making a Western Conference Finals. Maybe they win another couple series if he stays around, right? But he probably wasn't going to win a championship, certainly wasn't going to play in 2 finals if he'd stayed around. I mean, maybe Magic, right? I don't know, but seems relatively unlikely based on the path they were on. He was never going to match Clyde in his on-court accomplishments. I think Clyde at briefly in his NBA career was probably the second best player in the league. Dame was never going to be that either. But why he was going to be the greatest Blazer of all time is because of the soft stuff. Because a connection with the fan base matters. Because part of being the greatest Blazer is, quite frankly, being a freaking Blazer, right? Like being around, being part of the community, being, showing up. And like, what makes you the greatest Blazer is that fans see you and they know you are a Blazer. They don't know you as a former Blazer who now has connection with the Houston Rockets and won a championship there and lived there for obviously went to college there and lived there for a long time, and it's like mostly readily associates with the other team that he played for, not the team where he's the greatest player of all time. I think the moment that Damian Lillard asked out the idea that he could become the greatest Blazer of all time, the moment he asked for a trade, that's over. That stuff's done. I think you don't get to win the soft stuff if you also requested a trade in the end. Clyde Drexler is the greatest Blazer of all time. He is. It is hard to reconcile that with someone who hasn't been around and doesn't plan to be around and won't be around because he has beef with the organization. But at least now we know the deal. Respect to Kerry Eggers. I will link to that story, which is on kerryeggers.com, in the episode description for this episode. I don't hold your breath for Clyde Drexler, because I wouldn't hold your breath for a sale of a team either. Keep taking deep breaths. They can be very grounding. They're valuable. Cherish them. Join me in the second segment, though, because the Blazers play a meaningful game on Thursday evening to kick off a road trip at Sacramento. At beautiful downtown Sacramento at the G1C, the Golden One Center, a game with serious postseason implications. Let's talk about that in the second segment. Join me there, won't ya? First, though, let's talk FanDuel. It's back. March Madness. We took a brief break, right? Because you get the men's tournaments Thursday through Sunday. Over the weekend, the women's tournament picks back up and they play into Monday. And it's just fun. You get tournament games all weekend. This is the madness of March. And we've reached the Sweet 16. We'll get the Elite 8 here in the second weekend of both tournaments. And FanDuel wants to give you a chance to get in on the action like never before. Because right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. Are there Cinderella stories in either tournament this year? Not really. Pick your own Cinderella. So if you do find some slight underdogs, you can follow them and make some wagers on FanDuel, or you can just enjoy the games with some live betting or some parlays or some add to your picks if your bracket's already busted. And the FanDuel app is simple, easy to use, and you can go right now and get in all the action. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on all of your college hoops action all weekend long in both tournaments. All right. The Blazers, Thursday evening. They're going to be at the G1C. Sacramento, California. Beautiful downtown Sacramento, the capital of California. The Bear Republic. They'll be playing a meaningful basketball game in late March. What more could you ask for? Well, shoot, I'm about to ask them to lose. I don't know if I'm going to ask them to lose. I am merely going to say that the Blazers, who currently sit in 12th place in the Western Conference, trail the Kings by 3.5 games. The Blazers are 32-41 in 12th place, and the Kings, reeling Kings, losers of 4 in a row. They're just bad. They're bad. They're 2-8 in their last 10, including 4 straight losses. The Kings are 35-37. Thanks in part to both Dallas and Phoenix losing, the Kings have not fallen out of the play-in tournaments, but they're only a game up in the loss column away from the Suns in ninth, who got wrecked by the Celtics. I watched that game just before I hit record. My goodness, the Suns looked very much overmatched against the Jason Tatumless Celtics. A horrendous loss. That was a mess. And the Mavs, who are healthier than they've been, also just lost their last game. Those teams are 35-38, half a game back from the Kings. If the Kings were to lose, they're going to fall behind those teams. It is meaningful for the Kings because if they want to hang on to a play-in spot, they have to win. And if it's meaningful for the Blazers because if they have any chance of leapfrogging Dallas, leapfrogging Phoenix, and I guess one of those three teams could make it, but leapfrogging Phoenix and Dallas, and maybe potentially leapfrogging the Sacramento if one of those other teams passes them. They got to beat the Kings. The Blazers, with 9 games remaining, they probably have to win 7. They might have to win 8. But they probably have to win 7 because they wouldn't. If it was a 4-team tiebreaker, they wouldn't win it. Head-to-head, they would lose it. They would lose the head-to-head to the Suns. They would lose the head-to-head to the Mavs. You got to get it done against the Kings. In part, you have to get it done against the Kings because they hold a 2-1 lead, and you got to. The Kings have the tiebreaker essentially, because it would be 2-2 and the Kings are going to have a better record against Western Conference teams. The Blazers can't catch them there. So if they were to tie head to head, the Kings would still have it after 2-2. But you got to leapfrog them, right? You have to finish with a better record. The Blazers have to finish with a better record than the Kings. They have to finish with a better record than the Suns. Have to finish it with a better record than the Mavs. If they're going to make the play-in, they're going to have to earn it by winning. So I think in the final 9 games, they got to go something like 7-2 to have a chance, right? Because they got to have 4 more wins than these teams. 8-1 is probably more realistic, quite frankly. But I think 7-2 gives you hope because none of these teams are particularly good. I guess the Mavs might be okay, but they're not world beaters by any means. I think it's important that these teams are playing a meaningful game because the point of any individual basketball game is to win it, right? Like I have been in this space pretty pro pragmatic losing. I hate tanking, right? I hate it. I hate the scourge of losing a basketball game on purpose. I hate when injuries are exaggerated or made up. I hate when Shaedon Sharpe is pulled off the floor and John Butler Jr. plays point guard for the final 5 minutes against the Spurs. Like I hate the disrespect of the game. It sucks. It's not like a fun thing for me. I'm very much into finding a solution that doesn't reward teams for losing. And I'm glad that both the Blazers and the Kings will get a game with stakes, right? And I expect them to play it hard and have it be competitive because the game has stakes. And what more could you ask for as an NBA fan than a game with some stakes in March? But if you're looking at the standings and looking at the number of games left and being realistic, the Blazers probably lose. They should. It is with a heavy heart that I just think, honest to goodness, there is more value in finishing with a worse record than there is in chasing 10th. I have spent a bunch of time on this podcast kind of avoiding talking about this, quite frankly, because when the Blazers, like the players and the coaching staff and pretty clearly the front office, and then front office never came out and said it. I mean, Joe Cronin said he wasn't going to, he didn't want to take the opportunity away from his players to go for it. And I think under the current rules, it's a little bit harder to outright just shut guys down. Like, hey, Anthony Simon's not playing now, like they did with Damian Lillard a couple years ago. I think the league has maybe done a better job cracking down on that. Now teams are just benching guys for the final, like benching Scotty Barnes for the final 8 minutes. I don't expect the Blazers to do that. I expect them to play it straight up. So I want to talk about why they should probably lose and how they would do it. And I want to say this. This feels a little gross. Offering a solution to how does this team lose on purpose is like not exactly what I dream of doing as someone who talks about a basketball team 200 plus nights a year, right? I want to talk about a good basketball team. I want to talk about the playoffs and meaningful games. And I want to break down the on-court stuff that happens that decides meaningful games. That's what gets me excited. The best part about basketball is basketball to me. I've said it many times on the program. I'll repeat it here. But I think when the Blazers visit the Kings on Thursday evening, tonight, as you're listening to this, they should lose. Let's talk about it. It has real value, real pragmatic value for the future of the franchise, which sucks, but it's true. Join me in the third segment. Still a pass first point guard. Still Mike Richmond. Still listen to Locked On Blazers. Listen, I don't think in any way, shape, or form the Blazers will attempt to mess with the game. As Nate McMillan once said, if you F with the game, it'll F with you. I don't think they'll do that. They've played it out straight up, and don't get it twisted. They have proven that they are better than the bad teams, right? There are a class of bad teams in the NBA, and the Blazers over the course of the last 2 months have proven they're better than them, right? They're better than that class. They have also probably proven in the same breath that they are not at the level of the really good teams, which is kind of where Thursday evening comes in. The Kings are 35-37. They're deeply mediocre, and they made some poor decisions across the franchise over the last probably 2 years, but particularly this season, to put them in a spot where they feel very, very lost. They feel like they're very Kangsy, right? They're back in the desert. Bad teams and losing can get caught in the cycle forever. I understand that and recognize that losing in and of itself is not the thing that solves your problems. No one, and certainly no one on this podcast, is suggesting that tanking outright is the solution and the end game to a problem. But what I'm suggesting is the math is the math. It's going to be pretty hard for the Blazers to get 10th. They could play their butts off and not make the play-in. But by doing so, they could kind of cut their own lottery odds in half for what I view as largely no reason. The Blazers are... If we flip the standings and we look at the Tankathon standings, the Blazers have the 10th best lottery odds right now, which gives them a 13.9% chance of getting a top 4 pick and a 3% chance of getting the number 1 overall pick. Those are particularly low, but they are effectively tied with San Antonio. The Spurs are 31-40. The Blazers are 32-41. So one up in the win column, one back in the loss column. If the Blazers were to lose and fall behind San Antonio, their odds from 10th to 9th would jump from a 13.9% chance at getting the number 1 or getting a top 4 pick to a 20.3% chance of getting a top 4 pick. That's not nothing. That's basically a 50% increase in your chances of getting a top 4 pick. That's meaningful this time of year with a team that you're effectively tied with. And it would go from a 3% chance at the number 1 overall pick to 4.5%, which again is a 50% increase in your chances. Is 3% likely? No. Is 4.5% likely? No. But you're just talking about the simple number of combinations that would land you a top pick. And generally speaking, the best players in the draft over the recent and long history of the league come at the top of the draft. Certainly, the draft lottery is not a pick, and the draft pick is not a player. I'm not suggesting that if you get a top 3 pick, it's solved. You can screw those up. What I'm suggesting is the best path to landing stars has historically been the draft, and the best path to picking stars in the draft has historically been the top. You just want fewer teams making decisions in front of you, and if you have an opportunity to increase your chances of picking higher in the draft, it seems like it might be worth it. If the Blazers were to catch the Miami Heat, and the Miami Heat, mind you, are extremely incentivized as an organization to make the playoffs, because if they do not make the playoffs, they owe unprotected picks in 2026 and 2028 to Oklahoma City and Charlotte. If they don't make the playoffs, those picks just become fully unprotected in the future. That's not good for the Heat. They need to get in the play-in, and they need to get in. The Heat are incentivized to win. And the Heat, as you stand here today, are just a half game at 31-41 ahead behind the Blazers with the 8th best lottery odds. If the Heat continue to win and the Blazers were to lose, the Blazers could jump from 10th, conceivably, to 8th. If you jump from 10th to 8th, your odds that currently stand at 10th at 13.9% jump to 26.3% chance at a top 4 pick and 6% at the number 1 overall pick. It's 100% increase in your odds. 100%. You're twice as likely to pick in the top 4, twice as likely to pick number 1 overall. It's just an easy choice at this point. Losing games sucks. Tanking sucks. But the league rewards losers. The incentive system in the league is very clearly defined here. And the Blazers have a much stronger incentive in my eyes to lose as opposed to chase the play-in, which they could play awesome basketball. And they've been pretty good lately, right? They've been pretty good for 2 months. They're a decent team. They've proved they're a decent team. Losing a bunch of your final 9 games is not going to crater your culture. I don't even really believe in that anyways, but certainly I don't believe it over a 9-game sample size to end the season. Get out of here. It's loser stuff, but loser stuff wins in the league. There's an obvious incentive system. In fact, 100% increase in your chances of a top 4 pick and the number 1 overall pick if you lose. They should lose to the Kings. It's important that they do so. So how would they do it? They're not going to tank, right? They're not going to just Denny's not going to rest and Tumani's not going to he's not going to get DNP Cooper. He's like how you would do it is you would slightly increase the rotation. So instead of playing 9 and sticking to basically a heavy 6 with a couple other guys to get to your 9, or with 3 other guys to get to your 9-man rotation, you would increase it to 10, and you would give a little bit more time to Duop Reith, and you give a little bit more time to Chris Murray, and you give you would just stretch out the bench a little bit more. You would just stretch out you would just play players that are a little bit worse, a little bit more often. And if you win, you win. But I don't think they can just yank players out of the game. I don't think they would do that. And I think I would feel a little bit dirty if they were 8 minutes left. Hey, Denny, go sit down. We're putting in Delano Banton to finish this one. Denny Avdia, watch it from the bench. That would feel gross. What I'm suggesting is one, they should have given someone a fake knee tendonitis tag months and months ago, right? But short of that, short of planting the seeds he missed 1 game with tendonitis, I hope it doesn't flare up in April. You just stretch out the bench a little bit. If Klingon picks up some fouls early, you go immediately small or whatever with Jabari Walker in there and see the Domantas Sabonis killed us on the offensive glass. Whoops. But you play 10 guys, you go a little bit deeper in your bench, you play your best players 3 to 5 minutes less than they typically get. So if Tumani plays 38 minutes and Denny plays 37 minutes, typically you knock those down to 35 and 34. Even both of them at 33 minutes, and you just roll from there, come what may. Yeah, I'm suggesting a plan that the Blazers lose. It feels bad. I'm gonna go take a shower here in a second. I have many times on this podcast offered solutions to tanking because I do think it's a scourge. But short of that, without a solution here and upon us, with the incentive system such that it is in March of 2025, the Blazers should do what they have to do. It is what it is. It's not cool. It's not a cool thing that we'll enjoy, but And right, like many of you can tell me that this is a loser mentality stuff, and I will tell you right now, it is. It is. This is loser stuff because the league incentivizes loser nonsense. The league at this time of year rewards chumps. So I am calling on the Blazers to join the chumps. Do some loser stuff because it will legitimately be a pragmatic victory for the franchise. The math is the math, and the numbers are what they are. The combinations of draft picks are what they are. It is not a obvious salve and an end to all of your problems, but it is almost certainly you are almost certainly better off finishing with the eighth best lottery odds than the 10th best record in the West. And you certainly are better finishing with the 8th best lottery odds than the freaking 12th best record in the West. And I think you can actually finish with the 12th best, probably 13th because you had to fall below the Spurs. But I think if you really believe the Blazers could fall very, very little in the overall standings, but just enough in the tank standings to make magic happen. That's going to do it for today's show. Tomorrow's show, we'll talk Kings. So what we do, 5 days a week, we'll talk the Kings game. We might not talk a ton about the Kings itself, but we'll talk about the Kings game and what happens. And the Blazers are going to win. They're going to beat the Kings. Straight up, they're better than the Kings. They're going to win, and this is all going to be for naught. And I won't lament it. I'm not going to cry about losing or cry about winning. Like I might be a chump, but I'm not a big time doofus. Like the point of the basketball game is to win, and the Blazers are going to beat the Kings tomorrow, and we'll talk about it because they'll probably play well and they'll probably stomp a bad team on the road, and you'll say, "Hey, they're good. Who cares?" And I'll say, "You know what? You're right. Join me. I'll eat crow." I don't even know if I'll eat crow, but I will talk about the game. Come back for that program 5 days a week, wherever you get podcasts, also on YouTube. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.